This webinar is sponsored by Vox. Upgrade your internet to Vox Fiber today and experience all the benefits of consistent, secure, fast, reliable, and cost-effective connectivity.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And it's an interesting thing that I'm doing right now, because I don't think I was particularly good at school. I don't think I was a particularly good school-going person, just because it's not really my nature. I'm a bit of a rule breaker as opposed to a rule follower. And I only got glasses when I was 13. So for the whole of primary school, I never actually saw what it was going on in the classroom. I had no idea what all the people were talking about because I simply couldn't see the blackboard. And yet I got through school and I wanted to go study English literature, which is what I did. And I found myself eventually, and by the way, I want everybody to tweet, Facebook, Instagram. This is not one of those presentations where you can't look at your phone. I really believe we live in an age where we can all multitask, even teachers sometimes. So let's just look at the way the world has changed, because I'm a guy who studied English literature. I got a degree in literature. Journalism is a kind of secondary option. And I found myself about 9 years ago running the business that publishes Stuff magazine. And I've been running my own businesses since 2001, when I got retrenched 2 days after I came back from my honeymoon. But what I've been looking at for the last 20 years is how we deal with technology. And the essence of it for me is how we solve problems. Because at the end of the day, that's what all of this is about, isn't it? We have massive problems in the world, in our country, in Africa, and we have to solve these problems because somebody's got to solve them. And it is always the people in their 20s who do the most to change the world. The great names of the technology industry, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, all of them started these, over a $1 trillion businesses from their 20s. And that's the kind of thing that happens to you, whether you like it or not. And what we really want to look at is how to prepare people going into the world. I mean, I didn't see the blackboard the whole way through primary school. It was never a part of my educational experience. And yet, because I read, and I still read vociferously, that's how I self-educated myself. And there was no Khan Academy or any of the brilliant online resources. But let's just stop for a second, because we always hear people talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And it's a real buzzword at the moment in terms of what the world will look like and where we're going to go. And it's worth remembering that at the beginning of the 19th century, so 120 years ago, 9 out of 10 people worked in agriculture. They worked on a farm, they lived in a small village. Most people worked for their family farm. It was mostly subsistence farming. There was none of the kind of big industrial farming that we have. And you can see in the background, that machine is a thresher. It was one of the earliest mechanical devices, and it made people's time infinitely better spent than ripping apart the corn. And what really truly fascinates me is along came the steam engine in the 1800s. And until then, the most sophisticated thing in the world had been a pocket watch, a little pocket watch like that. I have my father's, which I forgot to bring out. And it just shows you what a magnificent and monumental shift it was from having a watch as the most complex thing in society or civilization to something like a steam engine. And of course, this was the beginning of the industrialization of the world as we know it. And of course, it started with the steam engine, but it started moving to a whole bunch of other things, which we think of as automation or working in a factory. And this is a Ford factory at Detroit and somewhere in the beginning of the 1900s, 1905 or 1906. And what you can see is that just in terms of I mean, the world calls it blue collar jobs, the people who work with their hands. White collar jobs are generally, people who sit at a desk and work on a computer, or people in management. But blue collar automation began with this production line that Ford invented. And of course, he's given a lot of credit for inventing the motor car, but actually it was this production process of the production line that made it cheap and efficient and cost effective, because you can see the guys are working on the chassis of a car. Behind them are on the right are a crate of boxes and parts and screws and wheels. So instead of them walking around place to place, the car would come and they'd work on it, and then the car would move off. And of course, the logical extension of that is a Pretoria schoolboys Tesla factory, where all of the devices are actually robots putting things together. But around this time, this automation was really the kind of beginning of the second industrial revolution. And I think what we see now is really just a continuation of where we got to, because what it is first we learned how to automate the mechanical stuff. And then we digitized everything with the third industrial revolution, which I'll get to in a moment. And now that we've got all of that digitized, we can start to automate the white collar jobs, the digital stuff, because the data is in a spreadsheet or it's in a database, and there's something that we can ask artificial intelligence to do for us. And don't panic. We've got a few years before we have to start panicking just yet. So this is a picture of a factory at the kind of beginning of the 1900s, and you can see men worked in car factories, women worked. There's very sexist stuff, unfortunately, in sewing factories. And what starts to happen is the mechanical machines are replaced by these desktop environments. And this was a drafting studio in the very early days, and then it was followed by the third industrial revolution, which is really the advent of computer chips, the internet, mobile phones. And that started really in the 60s and the 70s in Silicon Valley, as it is now. And it grew into a vast empire. If you think about it, there is no gold, there is no oil in California, and yet California is one of the richest places in the world because it has Microsoft, Silicon Valley, Intel, Facebook, all of these enormous companies, notably not Microsoft, which is based in Seattle, but Apple is there. All of the other big companies have their headquarters in San Francisco or just outside in Palo Alto. And they have used this incredible piece of equipment called a computer to get us to where we are. And along the way, people started noticing that work isn't some place you go, it's something you do. Because, you know, now we've discovered after a year of living at home that the easiest way to get things done is to just get things done. You know, we grew up with this idea that you had to go to school to learn or you had to go to work to learn, and yet that is so remarkably different from what we have experienced in the last year. For us journalists, actually, it wasn't such a big change because we have been working from home or working on our laptops or working wherever we go. I would work at the Truth Commission. I would sit there with my laptop all day with it plugged in at the wall, and I would work all day. And it didn't matter if I was in the office or somewhere else. And the same for just about every industry, lawyers, bankers, anyone who works on a laptop in an office. It doesn't matter which office you're in. Microsoft Teams, which we are using now, I think has emerged as the most successful and efficient technology during pandemics or working from home, because it doesn't matter which office you're in your building or in your home office, you're still there. And as a lot of you have experienced, the ease of the education through the system. So this is the kind of beginning of the shift towards something that we've seen in the last 20 years especially, but it really started in the 90s with very basic Nokia phones. And this was what a computer used to look like, right? And when I spoke to your teachers last February, there were a couple of them that, like me, originally worked on these very basic computers. You can see it's got a Rubik's Cube on the back. It's got a, Space Invaders in the front. The music of the day in the back there is an LP. I mean, who would have thought that would become popular again? And this is the smartphone of right now, of our era, because just look at it. It is a small compact device. That is the iPhone 1 from 2007. This is the iPhone 12 Pro. That phone Steve Jobs is holding, and I went to a launch once where I touched his iPod. It's a funny story. That device was more powerful, had a better connection to the internet, could take photographs, could forward messages, had a processor that was more powerful than the spaceship that put humanity on the moon. It's really been an incredible shift. And everything from the web, that's what Yahoo looked like in 1993, everything has shifted to mobile, including the never-ending cat videos. That's what telephony looks like right now. Actually, I was in Pretoria last week and I took a picture of a certain incumbent telecom operator's network center. Please don't laugh. That is the upgraded system. And in fact, telephony doesn't look like that anymore. If you're going to talk on the telephone, you're probably going to do this, which is this woman I saw walking down the street in New York about 5 years ago. I took a picture. There she was having a video call. She could have been using Skype, FaceTime, WhatsApp. Of course, since then, Telegram's come out. Facebook Messenger lets you make calls. There's an abundance of ways to make a telephone call through the internet. And of course, later I looked at her book and saw it says where medieval meets modern, which remains my best description of New York. We're all on the phone all the time. Now, thanks to the Zondo Commission, at least we know who he was on the telephone to. The parents in this room have probably have heard this joke, and maybe some of the kids have, but the youth of today do not know the relationship between these two devices. I grew up with this as the music medium of my youth, of my teenage years. You had to wind literally the tape back in with the pencil. Everything is now based on our phone. And in fact, you don't even have to own music anymore. You subscribe to a music service like Spotify or Apple Music, and off you go. You can just rent the music that you want to look for. There's something amazing. You want to hear a version of Jerusalem, you just look for it on Spotify. Photography has profoundly changed too. This was the Nikon F4, incredible photographer. This is the camera, incredible piece of photographic equipment. This was the camera that the American photojournalists used in the 70s in the Vietnam War to send back photographs of combat. It was a really, really tough camera. It was, real time in the 70s. It was like 2 or 3 days later. But all of the stuff that we have done in the world now lives inside our mobile phone, including taking pictures. In fact, there I was in Moscow on the left and New York on the right. People don't take pictures of where they are anymore. They take pictures of who they're with. This was Nelson Mandela's memorial service a few years ago. And frankly, I agree with Michelle Obama. David Cameron is not that impressive. And that was before Brexit. Just to give you the best illustration possible of how mobile phones have completely infiltrated our lives. 2005, this was the inauguration of the previous Pope. The German guy's surname was Ratzinger. And you can see there's just one guy with a camera in the bottom. Fast forward 8 years later, and the current Pope was elected, this amazing Venezuelan guy, amazing man, or Argentinian, sorry. And there is, everybody has got some kind of digital device. And you can see that this has fundamentally changed how we as human beings experience the world. We're not there experiencing the world. We're there experiencing the world and taking a picture so that people know how we are, or getting a picture of our kid. I'm a bad one at that. But it just shows you how powerfully technology has been included in our lives. And part of the reason is because once upon a time, that was what a portable computer looked like. The guy on the left is wearing an Apple Macintosh. In fact, I have one of them. They are the original computers from this era. I don't know if my image is still showing, but that's what a Macintosh computer looked like. And it was amazing because it was all in one. It had a keyboard, it had a mouse, it had this funny little thing called a stiffy drive, and it was a breakthrough in terms of what portable computing was about. And you can see the guy on the right. I'm sure he could teach Eskom something about load shedding, balancing, balancing of the load. But that's not what a computer looks like anymore. It's not a desktop thing. It's not a laptop. It's not something you pick up. It is a mobile phone. And these are the latest fantastic devices from a string of manufacturers: Apple, Huawei, Samsung, the top brands in the world, Haichengewei. These are the devices that all of us have in our pockets all the time. And when I traveled overseas, and I traveled a lot during COVID, before COVID, I very often never use my laptop for days, because you can do absolutely everything you need to do on your phone. You can dictate messages, you can dictate emails, stories. There's a profound number of things that we can use with this different device. You know, my son is 3.5, and I've been thinking a lot about the kinds of skills that will be mission critical for him to get through school. When I studied journalism in first year university at Rhodes, there was the only people who needed to have typing as a necessary skill for their careers or their jobs were journalists and secretaries. 4 years later, when I finished my degree, everybody was learning to touch type in nursery school, in primary school, sorry, nursery school, that would be impressive. In primary school, people were learning to touch type. It became this completely important skill that you couldn't enter the job market with. And yet, I'm quite sure by the time my son gets out of school, he won't be typing on a keyboard. He'll be just talking to our technology, you know. And we see that with things like Siri and Amazon's Alexa and Samsung's Bixby and, you know, Google Voice, Google Assistant and Microsoft Cortana. All of these services are nascent, emerging artificial intelligence services, which are having to learn the most important thing that all of us humans learn, which is how to speak, how to communicate, how to understand our language and what we say. And of course, that's one of the big breakthroughs. And we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in a couple of the webinars going forward. But just to remember that this is the way people see the world, through these devices. There's a phrase in the industry called mobile is eating the world. Not eating, has eaten. There's also another one called software is eating the world, and that's true. Software is replacing so many of the things that you used to have hardware for. You buy hardware that can be configured to do different things. Where do we see that happening? Cell phone towers that are equipped for 5G, they've been equipped for 5Gs for a year or two. You just change the software to get them to do what you want. Just by way of comparison, that is the first personal computer that was made in the world, or one of them. There were about 200 of these very original Apple I computers that Steve Wozniak, the other Steve who launched Apple, handmade himself. It's really, truly quite remarkable. I don't know how many of you have seen these. They've probably got them at the office or at school. Your parents may have them. You may have them at home. They're filing cabinets, you can see on the left, filled with reams of paper. It just doesn't exist like that anymore. There's no way you can have data that isn't digitized, that isn't part of a database, that isn't enabled for us to search it. You know why? Or do you want, I go to press conferences and people give me a piece of paper and I go, can't you email it to me? There's nothing, you can't search a piece of paper. We have these cabinets in our office. We took a angle grinder and we burnished them down to the underlying steel. They look really cool and funky. We put casters on them. What do we do with them? We store the plates and the extra coffee. That's what's happened, because everything has gone up into the cloud. And the cloud is just a fancy way to describe internet-based computing, cloud-based computing. The cloud is a server in Iowa or a server in Cape Town, a server out near the airports in those massive Terraco data centers. This is what the internet is, and it's closer to us now because we have those data centers in Africa, especially good for the gamers. And really, I'm really interested in what Kuro's doing with Minecraft. And we're going to talk about gaming, and gaming is a part of education, and gaming is a career in one of the webinars. There are people who make $1 million a month playing games. I mean, my parents would never have believed me if I had proposed that. But we need to understand in terms of what skills we're going to need going into this world. I'm a kid, a shy kid who didn't wear glasses till I was 13, and I ended up running a business. I studied English literature and journalism. And yet, because my mother, hi Ma, imbued me and my sisters and brothers with such pragmatic common sense, it just set me up. And my business partner, Sally Hudson, and I, we've been talking about this. She has 4 daughters, 2 out of school and 2 in school. And they are looking at exactly, this is how this conversation started between myself and Angela and Sally about how are we going to train people, our kids, what are we going to train them in the world to do? And that's when we realized that there's a lot of stuff that people need to know. Sure, We're not going to learn all the specific skills to load an advert on Facebook or Google. That technology is going to change. What we want to do is start to work with people's minds and understand that the most important skill, and we're going to go through this at length, is the ability to learn. Not learning something, but the ability to learn. And it's what Alvin Toffler, the great futurist, who wrote a book called Future Shock in the 70s, said. He said the most important skill is the ability to learn. And that's been my personal story. Like I said, I studied English literature and journalism. My job credentials were I got shot at in Vosloorus, and someone called me a racist. In journalism, those are your, you got to earn your stripes before you can, get your position. Now, so many of the skills that you would expect, when I was a kid, I went into journalism and the older people taught me all the skills. And that's part of the reason I feel so strongly about paying it forward. Nowadays, youngsters come into our business with a whole bunch of skills already that some of the older people don't have. And yet I call your generation digital natives, not digital born frees, digital native, the world calls you digital natives. I call you digital born frees, because you've been born into a world where there never was a telephone plugged into the wall. All of the technology I grew up with, the television only used to start at 6 o'clock at night. My sister Kathy and I used to sit and watch that pattern. I think there my clock behind me has got that TV pattern on it. So much has vastly changed, and we really think that there are a lot of very helpful skills that people are going to need. One of which is, of course, is how to use VR. I mean, VR is going to be one of the great new technologies, not just in terms of education, but designing. You could design something as sophisticated as an engine like that, all in real time, sitting at a desk. Another technology I think that's very fascinating is augmented reality. This AR headset is made by Microsoft. It's called the HoloLens 2, and you can see what it is. It's a surgeon doing surgery, and using that, you can see they've superimposed the images in front of his eyes so you can see what he's doing. The HoloLens tracks your eyes. So if you look down or you look around, it'll scroll through the story for you, knows where your hands are, works out where your hands are doing. And of course, surgery these days is people cut a tiny little hole and they stick something in. And you can see on the image on the right, the surgeon is looking, that looks like the blood system. You can see the heart at the top there, and the blue and the red. He's looking at those kinds of things, because on the picture on the left, you can see he's probably feeding a small tube or arthroscopically into a vein to get to a part of the body. Now, this is just remarkable. Of course, surgeons practice and rehearse before they do something, but this is an ability to have what you're doing inside a human's body visualized to you so that you don't make a mistake, that you can do things. And this is just profound. It just shows you how things are going to be really, really different in the world. And of course, people worry about the fourth industrial revolution and what we're going to do and how we're going to get ready. This is what this webinar is for. This is how we are going to get ourselves ready, me included. Believe me, in the next 10 years, the business model that we have been functioning on, the last year, the business model of print journalism has fundamentally changed. We know that we have to change with it, or we're going to be left behind. But just to reassure you, at the moment, we're kind of here in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, and in terms of what we think is going to go. We're still experimenting, like these guys in the 50s, experimenting with personal transformation. I mean, now you could just jump. I did this in Washington. It's so cool. You want to get somewhere, you open Google or Lime or any of the other scooters, you get a little scooter, you log in, they charge you like $1 a minute or 50 cents a minute, and off you go on a scooter. I mean, this is the kind of experimentation that was happening about transport 70 years ago. My favorite of all of them, of course, is the guy on the right in the unicycle. I mean, wouldn't you love to drive something like that with a brilliant gyroscope to keep it upright, I imagine. But there he is at a garage, smoking a cigarette. I mean, that's something that's completely disappeared. People just don't smoke anymore. So that's just an introduction. We just wanted to whet everybody's palates, get you excited about the kind of stuff we're going to do, because technology has had such a profound change in the world. We've had to redraw Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Who cares about motor neuron strengths and geophysical, geospatial system development, as long as we've got Wi-Fi, right? Anyway, this is just an illustration of where things are going to be going. So I hope that's interesting. I hope people are excited about the webinar series that we're going to do. It's brought to you in association with Curo Schools and Vox. And hopefully we are going to be able to equip people with more skills that they will need for living in this future world.